Доброго дня. Сьогодні ми продовжуємо форум з безпеки культури, який ми назвали
Today we are starting the forum on the cultural heritage, and the forum is taking place for 2 days. Yesterday we had a session with our international participants where we spoke about problems, tendencies, philosophy, worldview about this war. We spoke about how Ukrainian culture is targeted specifically by the dictatorial regime of the aggressor country, Russia. Also, yesterday we had closed discussions in working groups. And today we wanted to discuss issues that arose during our conversation in working groups. We're going to speak about conservation and protection of culture. These are clearly urgent issues today, and I am happy that today we have been joined by Anastasia Bondar, Deputy Minister. We also have with us Vera Livmo, and also the director of Palace in Crimea, right? Last period before the occupation. We have also been joined online by Olga Ahanchar, head of the Museum Crisis Center, and Kirill Koptsev, museum expert and conservation expert who is serving in the armed forces of Ukraine. We were supposed to have Vasil Pavlov with us, humanitarian historian and member of the group on communication with the ministry, but he had to go to the east urgently at night, but we know his ideas, so we are going to discuss it anyway. We have an hour and a half, and I would like to start our conversation with conservation and protection. We're speaking about the war, we're speaking about the heritage, and I guess culture and cultural heritage are among the most important targets of Putin himself, ahead of Putin's large-scale invasion to Ukraine. And all these justifications that he came up with about destroying Ukrainian people through the culture, through our landmark, it shows his intention. And yesterday we spoke about the enormous effort here on site. Of course, there are things to discuss here. There are critical things. We spoke about what should have been done, what hasn't been done, who is responsible, but also I think we need to focus on constructive things. We have to analyze what Ukraine lacks today to truly protect its cultural heritage, and not just the heritage. There was a remark yesterday that we shouldn't just speak about the cultural heritage, but also cultural sector at large, because there are also certain non-tangible, for instance, cultural assets, which are also highly affected due to the war. We speak about displaced communities. We know how representatives of certain cultural sectors had to leave Crimea, for instance. We know that there was an activist who created a unique space to represent the Crimean Tatar culture and had to leave. And since we brought up Crimea, I guess we'll start with Eminem. I guess Crimea was the first target, particularly in terms of the cultural heritage. So do you think it is really possible to preserve and protect the cultural heritage, the cultural sector during such a war? When no international conventions work, when the war is completely uncivilized in its manner? First of all, I want to thank the organizers for bringing up this subject. Indeed, in the occupied territories, culture has been largely affected. And the tool that is used to counter all these issues is international humanitarian law. Unfortunately, today we can say, and yesterday we discussed this in our working group, that the system of protecting cultural heritage doesn't work, not because it's bad, not because something is wrong, but because the system was built after the Second World War. The certain conventions also were adopted after the conflict in Yugoslavia. So the situation was, the formula of the situation was very different at that time. So all these things reflected the worldview of that time, not of today. And we actually faced the situation when it is almost impossible to use the existing system to protect our culture. There was a very interesting event recently. And we spoke how Odessa was included on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, but unfortunately it cannot protect Odessa from missile strikes. So I think that Ukraine has the task now to develop new mechanisms that will truly protect this cultural heritage. I think yesterday we spoke a lot how we need to study the experience of our European colleagues, American colleagues. I think we also need to look at the East and what they developed there, because, for instance, South Korea has a very similar neighbor to the one we do. Slightly strange, inadequate neighbor. And we held a short interview as part of our previous project with the international colleagues. And we asked, is there a perfect system established anywhere in the world on preserving cultural heritage? And some of them pointed out the experience of South Korea. And they said they have a very interesting system of protection of cultural heritage, which is built on annual training. And it includes aspects of technology, aspects of military. They even have a plan of what they would do in case of a nuclear threat. So I think we need to look at everything that is already available, and as a result, is pick what is most relevant to us. I think it is a valid idea, and also we can look here. We can look at our museum workers who are practitioners and who came up with ideas how to protect their purview. We can engage international lawyers who know how to work with international tools, the international toolkit, and can come up with what can be added to the existing framework. The international system is based on these two main pillars. One is attention to cultural heritage, and the other one is protection of cultural heritage. But all these ideas mostly belong to peacetime, when you have to develop something in peacetime in order to protect something to wartime. And another remark is that the international system for protection of cultural values, particularly the issue of restitution, are based on the idea of goodwill of the aggressor. Fortunately, today we are facing the situation when it's something completely unreal. We cannot expect goodwill from the aggressor. It's something that we really cannot hope for. So Ukraine can actually step in at the forefront of this. It's maybe a good thing that we know what we can expect from Russia. Thank you. During the forum, many people pointed out that cultural heritage is an element of national security. And it's a priority of national security. And when we spoke about developing new tools, indeed, the international security system doesn't work anymore on the political level, on the diplomatic level. And in the cultural sector, we also see this crisis. We saw many examples of this. I will just find just a few examples. Some countries, like when you compile a list, in some countries those lists served indeed to protect something, and in other countries those lists actually served as targeting aids to the enemy. The Ukraine hasn't yet started using the advanced best practices that exist now. There are rapid response teams, there are instructions, there are various toolkits, there are a lot of things, horizontally and vertically. There is a system of clear coordination among various systems. There is a protocol, right? There have been attempts by Ukrainian museum workers since 2015. Back then, the Museum of Maidan developed the concept of a safe museum with the help of Prince Claus Foundation. We developed this concept, and there was even this separate manual at that point, which included several international guidelines. There was a toolkit, so there were basically several initial tools. Back then, the government unfortunately did not continue this initiative. So there are indeed quite a few problems here. We remember that threat when we said that Russians even target UNESCO protected objects. It means that you cannot protect it. When it comes to Sophia of Kiev, the Sophia monastery, you cannot really cover it up with anything. But an effective protection would be documenting of these objects so that if they are damaged, you could restore them. It's like 3D scanning. Anastasia, the following question is to you. Perhaps not all representatives of cultural sector, which is quite conservative in itself, understands digital transformation here. What can we speak about here? You know, digital transformation, unfortunately, cannot protect from destruction. It is about preserving the memory, and it is about providing an opportunity to restore, to bring back the original look. And if we have this in detail, we speak about laser scanning. It is the most detailed tool that we have now if we speak about architecture, because we can also speak about laser scanning of any objects, including museum objects as well. But again, what country in the world had this experience of the past 70 years of such a massive aggression, of such destruction, of such a scale of relocation of objects? So we speak about protecting culture, we speak about more profound investigation of culture, about access. All these issues did not appear during the war, but they definitely became more acute. We understand that we will live in two paradigms in the near future. It's a constant threat of the war because we cannot change our neighbor. Unfortunately, that's the reality that we live with. It is a fact based on which we have to build those protocols of safety that you speak about. To be honest, I'm not certain that all developed countries have protocols of action in case of maybe those that are in active seismic zones, for instance. They are developing something, I guess, but I don't think that all countries have these protocols and have these mechanisms. Maybe they are starting to think about it now, based on our example. After more or less peaceful 70 years in the European territory, people started forgetting. And our example shows that this is something that we need to speak and think about. But digitization is taking place indeed. And the biggest issue that we have here is the paper form. That's what digitization works with. Is inventory books. They are regulated by the law today. This is something that we work on, we want to change, but we can't just change it based on a change in legislation. Like, let's do it electronic as opposed to written. We need to change the entire system here so that it can start working, right?
So we need a national platform of cultural heritage, which would have a lot of dimensions inside, which would cover movable and immovable cultural heritage, musical, cultural, anything that you might imagine, because you understand that probably nobody is talking about this, but we also have the Crimea, we also have Odessa Oblast, and a huge amount of things that are located underwater, something that haven't been started yet. And potentially it could be very interesting. It might attract tourists and help us develop this touristic sphere. I wouldn't say that the problem is that we cannot understand what we are working about, because when we start working, we start looking at these inventory books, Excel spreadsheets, especially when all is happening, when the missiles are flying all over Ukraine. Of course, it is a bit chaotic. However, that's great that we understand that this is a problem. In any case, we always have to think about something positive and to do something to create for the future, to better understand how we shall move forward. Instead of just creating a system or register, we need to understand that one museum is different from the other. And we also have a lot of things to discuss. They need to be interconnected. There are dinosaurs in other museums, and it's also kind of a cultural heritage for some people. We need to crystallize what we are working with, and it's not always an easy process because some people are not always ready to agree with each other. It's also a problem. Within my year of work in the ministry, I've seen a lot of working groups who got together to understand what to do something. Some of them want to create a registry and register, some of them want something else, and they cannot find a compromise. So we do have problems, we do understand them, and everyone understands that digitalization is definitely necessary. However, we cannot do it overnight. We need to do it step by step in a proper way. So everything is taken into account. All the risks are taken into account. And of course, we must understand how to do that in the technological way. Because when we are talking about digitalizing everything, we must understand that we must have broadband internet connection. We must have electricity all the time. That is why there are a lot of aspects that we need to take into account. As for this problem about different groups and about different visions, I remember in 2014, the Minister of Culture also tried to do something like that. When the Crimea has already been occupied, Donetsk and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast were also occupied. There was an attempt to get together these digitalized information from inventory books. A lot of my colleagues back then, they were suspicious towards this transfer of sensitive information. They were afraid that it might be used in a bad way. However, we do see results because some museums that lost not only their collections, but also their stocks, their inventory, especially in Kherson, Mariupol, Melitopol, there is information. The information is, we still have information from 2014. Of course, it's not complete. Of course, we don't really know in what state it is, but in any case, we have it. So we are nearing entering the EU. Recently, Ukraine has reported about sticking to the rules. And recently, you had a report, Elena Chorno-Vasylshko, they are also responsible for collecting data, digitalizing collections from the database. So how do you think? Is Ukraine initiating this process? Maybe we don't need all countries to be invited, but the European Union has unified standards. Are you working in this area? I mean, by adjusting Ukrainian rules and regulations to the European. We have been discussing some kind of a code, for example, code of laws on protection of culture. Are you using this chance, including the chance of digitalization, to share experience? So this development is funded, so we now prepare standards or European laws for Ukraine. Are you working in this area? I have started discussing two key paradoxes that we are everything we do must be based on what we do. So this process was very important, and we wanted to get to know more what is happening. Unfortunately, after the start of the full-scale invasion, we still have those people who, when they get together, they ask, tell us what is happening in the ministry. We want to do something too. They have the right to do that. Of course, they want to hear from us what we are doing right now in terms of digital transformation, for example. We had a meeting yesterday. We understand that the situation changes every day. We are crystallizing what we do, what we see, what we want to have. And of course, by the way, we discussed a lot standardization. Yesterday, we have agreed on 3 key areas that we've been developing with them. First, this is technological area, computers and everything like that. We need equipment for the ministry because the ministry has never worked with such huge amount of data that we are talking about right now. 13 million objects in form of books and everything. We need to analyze that. That is why it is very important to have this inventory. When we are talking about digital transformation, we are not talking about digitalizing some kind of a database. We are talking about inventory, stock taking. We must understand what we have. So documentation is the most important thing, inventory, books, and so on and so forth. And then later, we will broaden this list to add more scientific information. For me, it plays not only a scientific role, and it's important to say, but it also plays a marketing role, because right now 3D modeling, digitalizing, VR, all these are tools that museum workers can use in order to attract more tourists, to attract more people, especially children. The younger generation, they cannot focus their attention on something for a long time. Just to come to a museum and to concentrate on a particular painting. We understand that we must do something in order to switch their attention, to have interactive videos, to have VR, AR, and something like that. And all of this is in the product marketing area. We need to use this approach. We have all visited American and European museums. If you come to a museum, they have projections. You can touch something, you can push buttons. Going back to the legislation, I must say, we must stick to European standards. We understand that they have started digitalization more than 15 years ago, and some of them have been there before. They have a lot of experience, but a lot has changed since 15 years ago. First, they took photos using not very good cameras, but right now people have huge photo studios, scanners, and everything. This is a completely different system of documenting. On one hand, we are lagging behind, but on the other hand, all this accumulated experience, we can use it right now. We can start from a much better position in order to move faster in terms of quality and quantity. That is why, for me, I think it is important to use at least those standards that are there right now, or to develop new standards together with the European Union, because right now we hear a lot from the Europeans. What are you going through right now is important, and we are ready to listen to you. We do not know what is emergency evacuation of cultural heritage. Maybe we shall add to this registry some kind of a monitoring system that would follow this system of evacuation of cultural heritage objects. So this is a kind of a logistical system, and this is about relocating different cultural objects abroad. Now we say that we're in this logistics system inside the country, because we must understand that we evacuated something from Kherson to a western city in Ukraine or to a foreign city. People ask, tell us, how are you doing that? So we see that it would be more of an exchange of opinions, cultural exchange, and we will discuss how we can improve those systems. Thank you so much. And now let's go back from the digital world to the real world, to people. Do we have with us Ola Honchar? Yes, I'm here with you from the very beginning. Hi everyone. Ola Honchar, together with her colleagues, from the very first days of the full-scale invasion, she has started taking care of people, including our colleagues who were in a difficult situation. We often tell about this at the international level when reaching out to the international institutions, when they ask how we can help you. We are talking not only about protective equipment and everything like that. We are also talking about people who lost their jobs, who lost their relatives. We have statistics of losses. How many people have left Ukraine? How many people lost their homes? How many of them have lost their opportunity to work here in Ukraine? So, Ola, your experience when you really focused on your initiative to create this museum crisis center, and when you decided to help concrete people. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. Everything started on the 3rd of March when I wrote a post on Facebook asking what will we do with those who stayed in Ukraine, because it was very scary at the beginning of the war. Everybody started leaving, and everything started from my communication with Olesya Ivanova, director of Luhansk Local History Museum. In Starobilsk, they were occupied right away. They didn't have the time to leave the town. So I called her and asked how we can help you. Elmira also was there with us. She was in touch with everyone, and we discussed all this. We understood that our museums, for example, Luhansk museums, didn't have enough money. They just didn't have money at all. The city was occupied. Everything was completely blocked. No money. Even if you want to leave, you cannot do that. The prices are skyrocketing. Medicines, water. It's impossible to understand where they stand. Even before the war, the museum sector wasn't very the salaries in this area were not very high. That is why our colleagues from the very start of the full-scale invasion, they stayed in Ukraine. Most of them were protecting the artifacts of their museums. They protected them. Sometimes they lost their lives and their health. So on the 3rd of March, we started. We were thinking what to do, to collect money and to allocate money, because of course people were struggling to make the ends meet. Their salaries were $100, $200 per month. Unfortunately, the situation was very difficult. We talked to our colleagues, and of course, they said that they didn't have the opportunity to work properly. Some of them were fired because they moved abroad. So it was a catastrophe. Yesterday, we had a request to the Museum Crisis Center for help for a museum in Lviv Oblast. So to see if we worked with the 10 regions of Ukraine. Of course, Donetsk, Luhansk Oblast are the priority, Kherson, Zaporizhia. The most dangerous areas now. When the war has started, we also had Chernihiv and Kyiv Oblast because they were also quite dangerous. The frontline changes and the intensity of our work changes also. But right now, I see that we also receive requests from Lviv Oblast, and Lviv Oblast is considered to be quite safe. So the situation is awful. I'm talking about it everywhere I can. I say that museum workers need some help because they are left without money. They have been protecting their colleagues and their artifacts for this year. At the Museum Crisis Center and this, we have distributed 3.5 billion hryvnias, 120 museums, 10 regions, more than 1,000 people. 3,000 hryvnias. This is an allocated help to one person. We had teams of museum workers that we also helped. We will continue doing that. However, one museum crisis center won't be able to help the entire museum community in Ukraine. Those decisions must be taken at the national level, so they're not depressed with their financial situation. Because our colleagues, they are heroes. If we don't have this museum, there would be Ukraine. Culture is important. We have had a lot of international conferences. The Ministry of Culture says the Ministry of Finance doesn't understand us. Other ministries don't understand us. Maybe we shall do something else. Intra-ministry conferences, because we all here, we understand what we do and who we are. Maybe we shall take the representatives of the Ministry of Finance to museums. I don't know who's blocking those decisions. Maybe the Ministry of Finance has to be explained what we do and how we try to survive, because it's just awful. I want to conduct a survey on the state of salaries in our area and on the state of rights in our sector, because we need to do something to improve the situation. As for the digitalization, so the Museum Territory of Terror, our collection is consist mostly of oral history, and it's not considered a proper collection. So we want to scan it, we want to do something to it. However, what we have, we need to improve. As for the digital security, this is a question of security first. We need to understand where to collect those data, where to archive those data. So there are no Russian agents, for example. At the third, we have launched a project which is called Hurt or Wounded Culture, where we have started collecting oral history of our colleagues, museum workers. Because of this experience of how to be a museum worker at war is very important to document. We have visited Ochtyrka, and we will continue developing this project. We only had money for Ochtyrka, but we're looking for money to continue working.
We started creating virtual tours of destroyed museum. Ochtyrka was also first for us. We are taking it to Berlin, to Amsterdam, and we are going to show the entire world what it's like to be a museum worker in Ukraine at war. Last year, I had 11 international conferences. I am planning this year now, and it seems like the world just wants to stop thinking about this already. They are hoping this will not get to them. So are at war. People who are from Ukraine are working with generators, power banks. Sometimes you have no chance to wash your hair because you don't have hot water. So they need to get down from the concept to the practicalities a little bit and understand that people of culture are essentially targeted. They are indeed on the list of targets. And we also need to share the story of that. Yes, that's true, Olha. Thank you for this overview that you provided for us today. A brief question. Could you clarify the sources of funding that you operate? Why am I asking this? Before the full-scale invasion, sometimes we complained that cultural heritage is often deprioritized. And when there is a crisis, an emergency, be it war, be it an armed conflict, be it a natural disaster, cultural heritage is deprioritized. But the cultural sector worldwide is financed at various levels. It is powerful, it is strong. And in such cases, we, of course, focus primarily on people. We put people in the center. The example was with the recent disaster in Syria and Turkey. It is another proof of this approach of international organizations. Yet, I know that many organizations, Economist Chrome and others, they insisted that cultural heritage are part of people themselves, because we are speaking not just about human bodies. We need to save people as a physical body, but we need to save everything. We need to save their memories, their family, the non-tangible assets that are part of their cultural identity. So my question to you is it difficult for you to find this funding? Is it some sporadic funding, or is it part of humanitarian aid that has been quite strong in the world? And if we speak about our ministries, I am curious whether these humanitarian aid programs are completely separate as aid programs for those individuals who were affected, or these sectoral aspects can also be applied here, that we are not just helping people or representatives of a certain sector. I would say that the entire last year, the sources of funding were very different. It was international organizations, private companies, just private donations of people who wanted to support our initiative. We had a lot of various donors. We engaged 3.5 million and allocated it. We have some funding for next year as well, so that we can start this year. This funding was primarily from Europe. I just don't know if it makes sense to name these. Alif, they also supported us. Primarily, these are international funds. We have a certain amount of funding for this year, but we are always looking for funding to engage. And during the conference, I have already took note to whom I can approach in the future. I always explain why we do it when I explained about salaries, about everything else. Sometimes it has become when I start telling them about the furlough, about it is not these scholarships, this financial aid. They just don't understand that the situation is quite that bad. That's why I think that we need to carry out some kind of survey. That a year has passed, we can organize something. Speaking about last year, it was easier to explain why we needed packaging materials, a generator, a power bank than $100 to help them continue their work. So about government programs, at one conference we were even offered, they said we were doing the work of the Ministry of Social Policy and they are the ones who should have to work on this. There was this aid on DIA. Remember, I don't know if they if it's still there or aid took 3 months to be delivered. And in the Museum Crisis Center, it's faster. For instance, the person needs to evacuate, they need 20,000 hryvnias to pay for their evacuation. Or they need to move a collection, that's 15,000 hryvnias. They cannot wait for 3 months. They need this money tomorrow because they need to move immediately. Our advantage is always being fast and being in contact. People just didn't have the time, you know, to wait for 3 or 4 months. People don't understand how things work in Ukraine. And here I always praise our online banking system because without banking in occupied territories, we could only communicate. There are certain difficulties. I bring them up at all kinds of meetings and conferences. My colleagues are seeing that with their fundraising experience. They are saying that it has been harder to engage money for Ukraine because interest is dwindling. But considering yesterday's conference, I would say that there is still some interest, at least. I think the work is ongoing and we need to show solidarity. We need to say things how they are. We need to be honest about our prices, which grew, which quadrupled essentially. Because without people, we cannot do anything else. Thank you. Thank you, Olha. If I may, I would like to comment because all these things that we are discussing now, they are so extensive that we can sit down all members of the government and it will all be relevant to them. And of course, the issue of funding, which has always been a pain point in culture, not just during the war. But of course, now we understand that this is not because the Ministry of Finance doesn't want something. It's due to the government's ability to maintain everything we need to fund today. And as citizens, as clients of our country, if we say what is important for us today, we are all going to speak about social services, about healthcare. We have retired people. We are going to speak about education. My children also need education provided. And the energy sector, because we all want to be warm. And this is necessary to provide heating, and agriculture because it's our food. So it's just an enormous number of issues. And where is culture in this, on this list? It's a philosophical question. Again, that's what we are speaking about now. We are trying to understand where this culture will be today. Mm, mm. I like this line that is attributed to Churchill, though I think it's a mess. If I'm not investing in culture, what am I protecting? I think culture indeed needs to be part of the national security strategy. And that's what the minister is working on together with the president so that it can become an integral part of our national security system. But it's very difficult to make these choices. You know, it's we have no more time to postpone culture for tomorrow. We should stop deprioritizing culture. All these people who are in hospitals in Lviv, and then the culture provides tours for them to museums, street tours, and so on, because this saves their souls as well. When children of IDPs come here, it is culture that provides them with a theater visit. So we should stop postponing this. And the war is not a reason to deprioritize the funding of the cultural sector. The war is indeed not a reason to deprioritize. Well, before, more relevant. I think the war highlighted that maybe there is a certain lack of understanding of the cultural identity of Ukraine and how culture is part of Ukraine's development. I would, I will not quote Churchill, but I think back at the beginning of summer, President Biden said at a summit in Japan that Putin is conducting this war against Ukraine's culture. And it was a recognition of the importance of preserving cultural heritage. I understand what Olha is speaking about. We are not competing here that we need higher salaries. We all understand this. It is about a systematic deprioritization of these issues. And when Ukraine is saying that it stands up for its future and is asking others help, we are saying we are not just protecting our territory, because Putin is destroying our people, our history, our identity, and protection of culture is part of this military strategy of protecting territories and the statehood. And in this context, I would like to bring up a subject which on the one hand is very difficult, on the other hand is very simple because it's very specific. Our subject is protection and conservation. Elmira mentioned the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Heritage during armed conflicts. And both protocols were signed by Ukraine. And one would think this is the legislation that we need to refer to, but it doesn't work either. And one of the main points in there is that Ukraine, it's not an option. Ukraine, as a signatory of the Hague Convention, should adhere to its provisions. And it includes points about preparation during peacetime, training, preparation, and so on. Of course, Ukraine didn't do this. But I know that for many years, there have been groups of activists lobbying these issues. During the occupation, during these transition periods, many landmarks are lost, particularly during these transition periods. That's what happened in Kherson back during the Second World War. And this points to the role of National Guard, National Police, the military. And we have experience of the civilian cooperation. But we have Kirill Kopsev with us, our museum colleague and an expert who is currently a soldier with the armed forces of Ukraine. Kirill is the one trying to lobby these issues of creating the so-called SPP unit for protecting cultural heritage in the armed forces of Ukraine. We can look at the experience of the French, Americans, the British, and it would seem there is a very specific practical model here. We are training the military or mobilizing them from among experts, historians, archaeologists, museum workers. We are creating a unit which will work on protection of cultural heritage and work on investigation later. Kirill, what is the situation in the sector? Hello. Well, look, I guess I will start by commenting on what the previous speaker said, because I believe during the previous year, we saw that there is a lack of understanding of conventions. I often feel that people didn't even read the convention, in speaking about the second protocol, but Protocol 1 and the executive regulation and the convention itself. And when people say convention is not working or something like that, it's not the convention that isn't working. We are not executing. That's the issue. What is the main point? It's not about saying there is a convention, it's not effective, it is bad. It is ineffective. The point is that the concept of conventions was created by people 9 years after the World War. And most of those people could not even think that something like that could happen in the world again. And it applied to all participants of that war. When the second protocol was created, it was created because there was a task to transition from the military sector to the humanitarian sector. We have to speak about actions during a crisis, not just during the war. It's interesting that Elmira brought up South Korea as an example. I can say that this is probably the only Asian country that signed the first and second protocol of the Hague Convention. And then the question arises of executing this convention, right? When we say the blue shield has to be used, it has to be done by people. And my question is, who signed the convention? The convention was ratified by the state, the government, legislative and executive agencies signed and ratified the convention, and they need to execute it. And I think our primary problem is that we are trying to explain why it doesn't work. What did we do to ensure that it works? That's the most important issue. I see that nothing has been done in 11 months during this. Did somebody hear that we need to have patron countries in terms of cultural values as part of this convention? Did we initiate the process of appointing the High Commissioner for Cultural Values on a territory? Did we create a system of cultural value inspectors? All of these points are the requirements of the Hague Convention. And none of that is there. Did we all establish this system before the war? Were we working on this between 2014 and 2022? No. So if we sum up, It's the most important thing is not to talk, but rather to do. War is about crisis management, and we cannot work like we do during peacetime. Like we need a month or 2 or 3 or 4 for something. We are now working and have to work as part of a crisis.
We also have to select our priorities, those that we have to have now. That is why my position has always been the following. If we can do something right now, of course, we don't have any time to develop a code of protection of cultural heritage. Most of the experts, they agree that we do need this. But for example, France has such a code, not the perfect one, something that we might have, but other countries do have it. France has it, for example. The same goes with changes of the management system in the system of cultural heritage. We are talking about creation of a state service on cultural heritage as it is. We've been discussing it for at least 10 years. Within the past 5 years, this service hasn't been created yet. We can create an institution, the task of which is to help cultural institutions that care for the cultural heritage to develop all those actions and plans, including in emergencies, to develop strategies to help those institutions do something every day. Okay, in peaceful times, it was a little bit different. But we are not doing what we have to do. It seems to me that right now we cannot do that because we do not have enough resources to do that. In our opinion, we have to do it a little bit differently, to have a task, to perform this task, but to have our strategic goal in the end, after the end of it all. What Anastasia does from the point of view of digital transformation and everything, I see by the commentary before the full-scale invasion, we have conducted a training among the museum workers, and we explained what is digitalization and digital transformation. When people say these words, they don't always understand what it is. And digital transformation is a strategy which must be connected to a strategy of development of cultural heritage. It must work for the interest of the entire sector. Anastasia is right. This is a huge amount of work. There is a part that we can do right now, but there are priorities. We have other priorities. For example, I have the question related to the convention. If we say that we will use digital technologies that we are now using to document the crimes, for example, do we have it written in the legislation that a digital form is an evidence? No, we cannot use that as evidence. For example, if we come to the Hague Tribunal tomorrow and we show, take a look, they will ask us, do you have stipulated in your legislation that this form of documentation can be an evidence in court? Nobody is thinking about that. We have to discuss those strategic things and act not only for today, but also for tomorrow. If we are trying to record everything in digital format right now, then at least we have to add to our legislation that it might be used as evidence in a criminal proceeding. And we can, for example, submit to the Hague Court if it is really related to breaching of the Hague Convention. There are a lot of things like that. If we failed to develop system of emergency response evacuation before the war, then it is necessary to create corresponding structures right now and to develop all these things, to record those things, and then based on our experience, based on the experience that our partners can give to us, they are ready to share their experience. Right now, I don't see that we on our side want to do that. We need to develop a new system of emergency response. In the situations that we have right now, I had a lot of discussions with other people in terms of creating a special unit, a special department. All of them use the experience of different NATO countries. Some of them have a special unit, some of them have officers, some of them have special lawyers from related to international humanitarian law. But I have the question, of all those countries, some of them have a story similar to ours. Do they have a war raging on their territory? No. Most structures that have been created in those countries and those military units, they were created in emergency situations, maybe. Or they were created in order to carry out peacekeeping missions in other countries. The Hague Convention, the UN Charter were used. But right now, what I see, that we have gaps. Ihor can tell us more from his experience when the lack of military support in the area of responsibility of the military can lead to bad consequences. I'm not talking about cooperation and everything. We shall have cooperation. On one hand, this is a global issue. On the other hand, my approach is the following. We have to just do it. We need to stop talking and we need to proceed to doing something, to documenting, to using those skills and knowledge that we have to create this database of knowledge. And based on it, we need to continue developing and working and to develop all this that we have to document the crimes when we see a strategy, what we are leading to. If we say that our culture and cultural heritage is a part of our national security as it is, then let's start from small steps. Understanding that this is all very important for our country and for the entire world, and let's continue working. Thank you so much, Kirilo. Elmira has something to say. I do agree with everything that the previous speaker has said. Good news is that we are all on the same page. We understand that culture is an integral part of the national security. As for incorporating this into our strategy, I do agree with Ihor that we haven't made it our legislation perfect and in line with the international humanitarian law. We should have adopted all of this legislation, and we only joined the second protocol several years ago. So a lot of time has passed. We should have incorporated some norms of the international humanitarian law into our national legislation to provide the opportunity to our investigation bodies to investigate all these. But I disagree in when he says that nothing has been done. I do remember how much has been done when all civil society organizations that work with protection of cultural heritage, a lot of museum workers. After this, there were a lot of talks since 2014 for almost 8 years. Crimea has been occupied, as well as some parts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. And we have always raised the issues of special representative of the patron country responsible for culture. We have discussed creating of a special committee to protect cultural heritage. But in any case, this question cannot be solved, unfortunately, overnight, right away. It's not simple. This is about diplomacy. And the question is the question of mutual understanding on one hand, and on the other hand, we still rely on the vision of our European partners. As for the situation with Crimea, Bakhchisarai, Khan Palace, what I want to say, all of you know that we are losing this landmark. This is a completely new building right now, unfortunately. Khan's Palace has been changed, and we cannot even say right now that it can be part of the UNESCO heritage list because it has lost its original appearance. I have talked to experts from the UNESCO Secretariat, and they openly said, no, the mechanism of special protection, the mechanism of protection cannot be used in relation to the objects that are located in occupied territories. So it's not that easy, but I fully agree that the first thing we have to do is to incorporate norms of the international legislation into our national legislation. And second, we need to find new mechanism because almost all norms of these conventions, the first and second protocols of the Hague Convention, they are related to agreements with the occupying power and with the aggressor country. But of course, we see that we cannot have any agreements with the aggressor state. The Hague Convention, the first and second protocols, they are based on the rules of waging a war. But the aggressor country, the aggressor state, it doesn't stick to these rules. The aggressor state uses cultural heritage objects as military targets because they do use them as military targets. Can we appeal to the goodwill of the aggressor? No, we cannot. That is why, of course, we cannot use that, the international humanitarian law. It is very important to collect evidence, but to find evidence for the targeted destruction of the cultural heritage objects will be a very difficult task because to develop this evidence for the International Criminal Court, for all the prosecutors of the ICC, it will be enough to use as, it will be very difficult to use it as an evidence. That is why we need full cooperation of the practitioners, of lawyers, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of the Ministry of Culture, experts, civil society, military. We shall have this full cooperation. Thank you. And I would also like to add that, you know, Miroslav Mlinovic said something interesting. He said that this occupation, which happened in 2014, occupation of Crimea, is a tragedy, but this tragedy has some kind of a blessing because Ukraine finally has recognized Crimean Tatars as our own people, and Crimean Tatars have discovered Ukraine. Something that seemed like a threat before. Let me be honest, right now we understand each other really well. We understand each other a lot. So similar situation with February 2022. This huge tragedy has something of a discovery. We finally understand who we are. We became so interested to our culture, identity, and history. It seems to me a revolutionary way to do that. Evolution would have taken too much time, but right now we have identified ourselves fully as Ukrainians. This is of utmost importance. Culture for all of us is not just a part of our life, but it's not something secondary. It's the basis of our existence, and it seems to me very important. Thank you so much. Of course, we have questions from other participants of our forum. Ola. We have two questions to Anastasia Bondar. The first one is the following. Olga Voloshenko, Slobokova, PhD in law. Can the Ministry of Culture initiate creation of a legislative commission to systematize and improve legislation in the area of protection of cultural heritage? Do you need the support of civil society, and what kind of support do you need? The key function of the ministry is to create and initiate. That is why, of course, any changes that need to appear in the country and to become the basis for future changes, they might and shall be initiated by the ministry, if it is also stipulated in the key law of Ukraine within the mandate of the ministry. The importance of participation of the civil society in this process cannot be underestimated. Today, by the way, when it comes to digital transformation, the activity of the civil sector, of the civil society, NGOs, all the organizations that are part of this process is very important. Even the representatives of the sector, representatives of museums, they initiate a lot of activities with donors, with any other counterparts in other countries. So it is also very important. We as the ministry, we do feel these initiatives, we do see them. People do not wait until the ministry initiates something. They start doing something themselves. Of course, when I look at the huge number of activities, I think, oh, okay, we have a chaos. But I do understand that at the same time, this chaos is very productive and very creative. This is the system that we can use right now. I understand that we just need to govern, to manage this chaos, but what is born in this case, so this is of essence, and we just need to structure it. Thank you so much. 3 questions from Valentina Bochkovska to Anastasia. Developing the strategy and general principles when digitalizing. Of course, your department does that, but on the other hand, practical work of the digitalization is the responsibility of museum institutions. Will it be taken into account in terms of allocating money to these institutions? Second, planetary scanners, computer servers for the museums will speed up our work. We shall have decentralization of these activities. We have to delegate key functions to the museums, but with proper support, with equipment and funding. The European funds send this financial assistance. It is very important to reallocate money, so these are commentaries and questions at the same time. Valentina Petrovska is the director of books and printing. What we are working with right now, this is development of the system of registers. Speaking of museums, we do not have a single registry for the entire state that everyone might use. Principles of interoperability with other registries, which is very important for us, so we can make all the processes automatic with the police, with the customs. And of course, for the future, this is about integration into the European community with Interpol and other agencies. As of now, this is one of the key tasks. Some museums do not spend money for this. Before we had another strategy. All the museums that had to be used, we need to allocate money and everything. As of now, this is possible if the museum has started working in a system. They have to continue working in this, and of course, we will have to join the single state system to get this money. I fully understand that the key idea is to provide everyone, all museums, the opportunity to work within this system. And of course, the museum will do a lot of work. Identical programs, they will be part of the cultural heritage. Of course, we are discussing the huge amount of monuments, including all the occupied territories. These are the monuments and landmarks. Last year, when we were collecting this data, there were 140,000 objects like that on the occupied territories, of course, without Donetsk, Luhansk, and Oblast and Crimea. And of course, we need to work with that right now, because this is about integration. We understand that how important it is that everyone is on the same page, and it is critically important to create this registry, this inventory of cultural heritage landmarks, because it is important for our culture. For example, there is a lot of work to be done, but it has to be done in any case. It requires changes to the legislation as well. Whether we use this idea to put on the map all these objects, we need to physically go there. We need to have something like that, and we need to do that as soon as possible. That's what we are doing right now. Digitalization from the point of view is very important, and of course it will be our task.
There are opportunities for this to approach the Ukrainian Cultural Fund, Creative Europe. There are few opportunities in Ukraine now, we understand that, but there are quite a few in Ukraine still. And we can approach the representatives who of this digitization initiative. Not every museum requires a scanner. There are teams who are ready to come to a certain region. It is a service which can also be paid for with grants. But please keep in mind that there is a comment by Valentina Bachkovka, director of Museum of Book and Print. I fully support Ms. Olga Honchari in the issues that she raised, particularly the financing. For instance, the funding of a museum was reduced by 60% between April and August. Everyone was furloughed, including the director, the deputy director, heads of departments. So we didn't understand how we could survive, essentially. Yes, we already spoke about this. It's a big issue indeed, but our time is running out. So it seems to me that we discussed real pain points. Of course, it is impossible to discuss all of this in such a short time. It's very difficult to develop an algorithm, a mechanism of action. But we could at least discuss these issues and identify them. And since the beginning of the war, we indeed didn't have enough coordination among colleagues who could express their opinion, coordinate their efforts. And the idea is that we shouldn't just speak, we should identify specific, realistic solutions. A lot of things were done before the full-scale invasion. There were trainings for response to crisis situations. There were templates developed for approaching municipal authorities, for instance, about regional evacuation commission, rapid response. We had a number of guidelines, starting from the simplest ones of what you do in an emergency, and up to translation of guidelines by UNESCO, ICOM on providing first aid and rapid response to emergencies. So a lot has been done in the initial stage, but we have a lack of what Kirill spoke about. We have a lack of this institutionalization of these initiatives in the government space. And we are indeed speaking about things that the government needs to work on: the Hague Convention, the establishment of the necessary infrastructure, and the true responsibility. These are important things, and that was the purpose of this forum, to identify certain vectors, because the chaos, as Anastasia spoke about, we need to be more organized, less chaotic in our actions. So to wrap up, I would give everyone to identify one problem that you think is priority, just very, very briefly, and one simple step to resolve this problem. You know, I don't want to identify problems. We spoke an hour and a half about problems. Just what you think as a representative of the authorities. You know, I've been in the authorities very recently, so I know I cannot compete with anyone who has been working in the sector for 20, 30 years. So of course, here, any experience the representatives of the sector can share with me, I always listen to it and I accept it fully. The one thing that I can advise is to keep moving, not to stop. I will speak about the elephant we need to break down piece by piece. This seems enormous. There are such big numbers whenever we think that are related to culture. We speak about these 15,000 libraries, about books, about the archive. It is a sector that is massive, that is enormous, and you see there is no end to this. But every day we need to do something to bring our goal closer every day. As for today's subject, I think that Ukraine has the right to develop certain protocols with more effective tools for protection of cultural heritage based on existing conventions, based on the experience that was obtained by our museum workers, by our military. We also know that there are museum workers who are in the armed forces now, and they have a certain experience as well. So I think that we indeed shouldn't stop. We should try to hear each other. And this communication should lead us to a new toolkit in the sector of prevention of future situations like this. Olha, your final comment? My final comment will be as follows. We don't have time to postpone culture for after the victory. We have to support the sector now. We have to support the culture workers. Without culture workers, changes cannot happen, because even digitization has to be done with the hands of real people. There are also people who write grants in museums, and those people require salaries, require to be part of staff. I am a practical person. All meta concepts go down to us, the direct, the people who are directly working in the regions, and I would like things to work in practice, not just remain at the level of concepts. I don't know who to speak with, the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Finance, to change the issue about the rights of museum workers and our funding. But on behalf of the Museum Crisis Center, I can say that we have an enormous amount of information and everyone is outraged. We will carry out analytical survey. We will come to you with the results, and we want you to hear us and to stop postponing culture for after the victory. Thank you. And Kirilo. I guess I mostly support Olha because she has a very practical approach. I would divide all of this into two parts. One thing is what we need to do now, right now, what we didn't do before the war, and what we haven't done in these 10, 11 months. We need to build a new system of culture management during the crisis. Work on preservation of culture, its protection based on our own experience, based on the provisions of the convention. That is, we need to do the things that are necessary right now without just speaking how necessary, how important it is. Everyone understands that it's important. I also agree with Elmira because overall, I think that after this war, after a victory, the issue will not just be about the culture, it will be an issue about security in the world at large. And if we have experience, we will be able to prove with certain actions, with certain facts. I think based on our experience, we will be able to develop certain suggestions about reviewing the system of cultural values. And we can move on to the creation of some new conventions. I'll remind you that before the Hague Convention, there was a rhetoric protocol, which was signed earlier, and it wasn't effective either. And we now have unique experience of working during warfare, during active hostilities. But in order to achieve this, we will need our foreign colleagues who will be able to support us in this. And our foreign colleagues also need to understand that the security system built after the Second World War is not effective anymore. There are no safeguards, there are no mechanisms, and this prevents us from being more effective when we speak about violation of the cultural protection system itself. The war, as it is a very cruel thing. There will always be compromises. It doesn't happen that we sign a new convention, immediately everyone signs it, and nobody ever violates it. The issue is how ready a country is for these things, how ready we are for these challenges, whether the country has built a system during peacetime when it really had the opportunity to do this, a system of response. Is the system there or not? That's the most important issue. So the issue is about actions. Later, we can speak about new conventions. The question is what we can do right now. For me, cultural heritage, cultural values, I think museum items that were preserved in the 40s and the 50s, they were all protected with blood of museum workers and their owners who made sure that we received these valuables. The question is how responsible we are about these things, as opposed to saying that people are more important. Yes, people are more important. People's lives are important indeed. But I think we need to understand also that what we received as heritage, as our legacy, we are responsible to our ancestors to protect all of this, because many of them actually gave their lives to make sure that we have this. And we need to pass it on to our children and grandchildren. Thank you. Thank you, Kirill, and thank you to the Armed Forces of Ukraine. as represented by you, because the armed forces enable us to preserve a cultural heritage. Thank you to the participants of our discussion, Elmira Belibova, Anastasia Bondar, Olga Honchar, Kirilo Koptsev. And it is completely understandable, at least for me, that we are doing many things, but we lack a certain strategy, a system that would help us work in an organized manner rather than effectively. And Harry and Museum of Maidan Museum, we are now developing a strategy for protection of cultural heritage in emergencies, which could become a part of the national security system, because there would be a clear understanding here. Thank you very much to those who were with us. And I invite everyone at 12 Ukraine time to the second panel, which is called Rebuilding and Restoration. We will see Vitaly Kitich there, who will continue the issue that we started, particularly documenting crimes, collecting evidence, and how this all works as part of international law. Thank you very much. Stay with us, and glory to Ukraine.